Next up, we have Doug Williams with the Wildland Services Incorporated, and he will be presenting on lessons learned. And also helping facilitate will be Greg Seaman. I'll hand him over to the mic, but I'll get everything situated. Yeah, just speak into that one. You just pull it right off, just pop it right out.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it should be on. You just speak right into it.
Right into it. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Yeah, I'm here today to talk to you a little about the wildfire we had at East Point. It's been about a little over 5 years ago, and it wasn't our best day. Of course, it wasn't our worst day, but it was pretty tough there when it, after it happened, dealing with it. But anyway, I just want to give you a little bit of history. We were burning under a Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission contract. We'd had a contract with them for about 5 years, and this is on the Apalachicola Bay area. There's the Apalachicola River Wildlife Management Area and the Box R. And so we had a contract to burn on some parts of those. I think probably the first piece we burned on was on the Box R. Be right. We burned parts in here. Then 2 times we had burned up in the upper area here. Let's do that next slide, maybe up. This is Sand Point, which is, Sand Point is from, say, East Point down here, and you come up Highway 65, and it curves going up towards Sumatra. And we were burning in there north and south of the roads in there. Before we burned this piece at, they call it Magnolia Bluff, we had burned this 480 acres. It's got a overlook right here. We had burned it. On this track, Florida Fish and Florida Forest Service put the lines in here, and we had their dozer on site with the ranger the day we burned it. And then go to the next one. This would be the Magnolia Bluff location, which is about, 2 miles probably north of East Point. And this is about 480 acres in here. This area I was showing you a minute ago, some of that track is over here. But in looking at this, the Fish and Wildlife Commission has a lab right here with a boardwalk. And then you got houses down here around East Point. This is the beach. This is Florida Forest Service property. Most of this in here. This is private property. I believe it's about 900 acres that the Watkins family owns. They're Ben and Steve are both prescribed burners, but I don't think they had burned this too much, but it's one of those difficult areas when you're right up against the urban interface. And so this area had been looked at as possible for mitigation, mulching to broaden lines in there, or possibly to purchase, but it hadn't, I guess the priority probably wasn't enough on that. Let's go back to that first slide. Just to give you a little bit of history on this area and some of the problems that have been with some of the escapes in the area. I remember working when I was at St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge. We were doing some black line back, I believe it was about 1986. And anyway, St. Joe didn't really burn too much. If y'all remember, they weren't a much in burning, but they did a burn just out of Carabel about 1985, 86, and they burned some piles in there and they got out, and this area would have been down towards Carabel, probably about right in here, and it jumped the highway and burned 2 or 3 houses along the road there. I remember about 5 months later, we were blacklining on the road there at, along the Oak-Lockney, and I hadn't been burning much at the time, and it was lighting along the road, and it was pretty smoky going across the surf road there out to the Oak-Lockney, and I heard this voice, and the lady said, "I hope you know what the hell you're doing." And I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. And, you know, still some days I wonder if I know what I'm doing, you know. It's kind of one of those things, you know. But so another thing that happened, Fish and Wildlife Commission was burning here on the Box R. They had a fire get out, I believe it's along in here, jumped the highway and burned some houses in there. Then about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years before we had this wildfire here, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission was, Florida Forest Service was burning in here, and they had the fire they lit after about, I think it was about 10 days, they had an escape and they put it out. Then at about 22 days, they had another escape and they put it out. And at 44 days or something like that, it got out and burned 900 acres up in this area. And they got sued over that. And the owner was a logger that sued the state, and now he's a judge in Apalachicola. But they had to pay some money on that one. So that brings us on down to this burn we did here. So this was June 18th, 2018. So it's been about 5.5 years ago, something like that. The day we burned it, we'd had Florida Forest Service put the lines on it for about a month before, and it's about 480 acres in that tract. We had 10 people, 2 brush trucks, one of our dozers, and we had Florida Forest Service on standby with one of their tractor plow units. The day we burned it, things went pretty well. The weather was about what we thought it would be. I was with a group up here. We were burning this line out to begin with. We had south winds pretty much coming out of there, and we were backing it off the line up here. One crew started here along this boardwalk and brought the line around the lab, and then there's some houses in that area here. So it took them a little bit longer on that end to pull that line around just to keep it from getting out around the boardwalk. And so we continued on. We brought this line down, came on across. They came on across, and the last parts we lit in here and stripped it. And by that afternoon, it was burning pretty good. So really, Doug Scott was our burner that day. And I talked to him the other day on, he said, well, you know, everything seemed to go really good that day. So we didn't really have any issues on it. You know, we had maybe a few spots, but nothing, you know, nothing that got any size. Something you went over and hit it with a brush truck, put it out. And Florida Forest Service had burned this up pretty recently, so there wasn't a lot of, you know, there wasn't a lot of fuel across the line in there. So going on through the week, I got a hold of the contact with Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and he looked at it on Tuesday and said everything looks good. It was close to the end of the budget year. We were in June. He said, go ahead and bill us for the burn. And so I went ahead and, filled out an invoice for it. On Wednesday or Tuesday, he said, I see some smoke. So we were back there on Wednesday with a brush truck and worked on the fire lines. Thursday, we were back there again and put out a good bit of water that day. I think about 400 gallons. That was about what that brush truck handles. And they got stuck in the fire line where the fire came out from. That's what they were saying from the investigation. It was wet enough in there, they got stuck. But Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission pulled them out that day. The next day, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission checked the property. Things looked all right. Saturday, it wasn't checked. And on Sunday, we were checking the weather forecast every day. It was pretty much steady light winds, 5-7 miles an hour, mostly out of the southwest down, the coastal, what you get down the coastal areas is mostly you get those sea breezes in the afternoon are pretty much southwest, seems to be kind of predominant coming off the water down there. And, we kept looking, well, if it comes out of the southwest, or if we had any escapes, it'd push it up towards the Florida Forest Service property in there. So on Sunday, I went with the church group down to Key West we were doing a Habitat for Humanity cleanup. And about 10 o'clock at night, I was sleeping there in the floor on the church and the phone rang, and one of the rangers from Tate's Hill said, hey, Doug, he said, I don't know if it's your fire. He said, we had lightning, but he said, there's fire out and it's pretty bad. And so so I went to sleep and got up the next morning about 7 o'clock, got a phone call. And he said, it's bad. He said, it took off and we couldn't catch it, houses burned. And so that wasn't, it's one of those days like they said on Hee Haw, if it weren't for the bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. But anyway, what happened that afternoon, the afternoon forecast, the morning forecast on Sunday was the same as like Southwest, but the afternoon forecast came out with chances of strong thunderstorms. And so a thunderstorm came in about probably maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. And there were 50, 60, 70 mile an hour winds coming out of it from the northwest. And the Florida Forest Service picked up the fire about quitting time on Sunday. It was about 4:30, 5 o'clock, somewhere in there where they got a report of the fire. They might have had a plane up, I'm not sure. But they came on down, and two rangers, when they got there, the report showed that the fire was at about the spot was about 2 to 3 acres. And they put a line around it, started putting a second line around it. Eventually the fire was at about 20 acres. And they were plowing on it, and then this strong wind came in, blew it out. And at that point, it was, you get those kind of winds pushing it in a timber stand like that, and it pushed it right on down to the coast. And those north winds like that, which is real unusual for late June, to get those kind of winds. And there was no rain in it, but there was lightning. I had a friend that was at up the creek. It's a restaurant at Apalachicola, and she sent me some pictures of sitting there across the bay of this storm coming in and just seeing the smoke column coming up. And she said there was lightning popping in there, but whether it was a factor in it or not, I don't know. So I called Doug Scott that night, told him what was going on. So he was down there on Monday. And, there was all kinds of equipment in there working on the cleanup. And they asked us just to stay back with our equipment there on the Fish and Wildlife Commission property. I asked Doug if he thought I ought to come back, and I said, he said, this investigation is going to take a while to happen. It might usually take a couple of months, 2 or 3 months. And so Tuesday morning, we were painting on a house down there, and about 10 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from the Tallahassee Democrat saying that Commissioner Putnam had said that our fire was the cause of the wildfire there, and wanted a statement, and I was kind of caught sideways, so I didn't say too much. And so I called Doug and let him know. And I guess Tuesday afternoon, I got calls from ABC News New York, CBS News New York, National Public Radio, like the Tampa Tribune, and it was like, man, I kept getting smaller and smaller, the feeling. But anyway, so I got a plane flight out of Key West that afternoon, flew on back, and, started dealing with it some. But just some of the things that came out of it, we went through lawsuits, quite a bit of litigation, answering questions, investigations, it's not a fun thing to go through. But I think one message to give you is, good or bad, what we do is a good thing. We got to stay with it. There's times when you don't want to be the person that's responsible for these things, but there are days where the things don't go right, and these lands were meant to burn. And, you can't always control nature, and so that was, I think, an issue here. Just coming down, this is maybe a little closer of where the fire came out. It might go down right around in here, one more down, and you can't really probably see it too well, but right in here is a pocket of tie along that line. When Florida Forest Service plowed that line, it was underwater in there, so they couldn't really plow it that well. Came back when we were there with our dozer, on the day of the burn, and opened it up some. But we had burned this area 3 years before, the same exact area, and didn't have any issues with it. And but out of this, the day we burned it, this burned pretty hot, because this was some of the last we burned that day, the drier and windier. But we weren't having an issue. We were backing it into here because it was wetter in there. And so this was one of the areas when Doug came back down that he focused on. There were still some smokers in there. And on Thursday, he didn't see any, he worked it pretty hard in there. And they got stuck in this line right here, right along in here. It was still pretty, wet enough to get stuck. But anyway, evidently it got out right in here. When they got there, they put a line around it, and then it got bigger. And then with that northwest wind, it ran south into the community there. So I guess in the aftermath of that, I just try to tell you some of the things that I've learned. The first thing I figured out was, where's our lawyer, And, so I called the insurance agent. I said, look, I don't know how to respond to these questions, so what should I do? So they gave me my lawyer. I talked to him, and he said, well, just don't say anything. He said, you're better off if you start making comments that they take the wrong way, it can make it look worse. You might want to say things that, I don't agree with this or that, but as far as, I think this is good legal advice, you just don't say anything except you do it through counsel, I guess. Anyway, so the fire, they put the fire out. I guess about 3 months later, we got a bill for suppression, which was about, I think, $59,000 from Florida Forest Service. So I asked my lawyer about it, you know, what are we going to do? And, you know, he said, well, you probably just need to pay it yourself. He said, you know, because we're going to give up this $1 million. That's basically what they decided that, okay, we looked at Florida Forest Service going to court in Apalachicola, and now the judge is in Apalachicola that got burned, his property got burned. And, you know, how are you going to get a neutral jury, I guess, in a situation where people have had damages? So in the end, we decided the judge was Judge Dobson in Tallahassee. He covered also Apalachicola. And so to stay away from going to individual lawsuits, Philadelphia Insurance said, okay, we'll settle for the $1 million if we can get a global settlement and find out whose properties were damaged, we can split it up amongst those people. So they got a mediator out of Jacksonville, and he was good at what he did. So I can remember this 2 days in Apalachicola above the courthouse, above the post office, right across from the brewery on the corner of the Owl Restaurant. We met with about 50 people, lawyers and the mediator, and for 2 days negotiated, and finally everybody agreed to sign and say, okay, we'll take our part of $1 million. And to begin with, we had about 75 people making claims. And the lawyer and his staff, they did intense background work on all these, went through all the records, how the state responded to it. There was quite a bit of money went out to the people that were involved, probably a couple $1 million to settle some of the problems that, that people had, boats burned up or part of their house, or thankfully there weren't any serious injuries. There were, I think, 1 or 2 claims for physical damage, but it seemed like when we got down to the end, there was about 32 people that were paid out of that 75. Some of it was just, you couldn't find anything that had happened that had been quantified, and so that's how they settled it out. Now they asked me in that meeting if I would pay $25,000 out of pocket, just as good faith or good, that I was sorry that it happened too, I guess, was kind of how that came out. So I ended up, putting out $25,000. They split it up. I wrote checks for however many people it was, individually. It wasn't, some of them weren't big amounts, but anyway, so in the end, we got it all settled, and, this was 4 years of stuff continuing, still having questions. Finally, in Florida, statute of limitations at 4 years. If you have a fire today, if 4 years, if people hadn't filed suit against you, they can't claim anything after that point. So it's kind of interesting to know that, although, you hope this never happens to you, but that's why you got insurance. I can tell you some of the results from, we were paying about $10,000 a year for liability insurance through Philadelphia. The next year after the burn, it stayed the same. The next year, I was talking to my agent in Thomasville, and he said, well, I don't have any quotes yet. And he said, I think I got a couple. So we get down to the last day, you know, the next day, I'm not going to have insurance. About 9 o'clock at night, he calls me. He said, hey, Doug, he said, I got good news and bad news. He said, I got a quote. He said, but it's $210,000 a year. So, and he said, you're going to have to make a down payment of $44,000 this week. So, you know, you start thinking $200,000, you know, it might be what we might make in a year, you know. And so anyway, so that week, you know, the next day or two, I gave him a check, and, you know, I'm sitting there like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go out of business, or do I might change my name, or, you know, what are you going to do, you know? And yeah, it's like you would like to disappear in a way. But so, you know, what I had to think about too was we have contracts with Panama City Airport, with Northwest Florida Water Management District, with Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, Swanee River Waters Management, St. John's Water Management District, and the U.S. Forest Service. And we had people working out west on wildfires at that point. And so I had to think through, you know, and, you know, you can imagine being in that position and having to pay that out and think about, you know, how your company is going to make it through it. But anyway, so we got through the first year, and it came down to the day to get another quote. This time it was $185,000, which wasn't much better. It was a little bit better. But this back in February, there's a new company in, I think they're more in Arizona, California. It's called Conservation United. And we got a $40,000 policy with them. So, you know, that made it so much better. But I think insurance continually is going to be a problem with prescribed burning. You know, here's one thing that happened on that fire. You know, there were lawyers all over the place. Morgan & Morgan, y'all probably heard of them. They set up a tent down there on the corner of the fire, you know, for a week, you know, trying to get clients. And we're in that era of litigation like that. And we see it every morning. When you get up, you turn the TV on, you know, it's there. So I'm not sure, you know, I mean, here's what's happening, and y'all see it too. I mean, each agency looks at their difficult places and they say, what are we going to do with this? And, you know, more and more they're going to contract, and, you know, okay, let's put it out there, let somebody else take this on. And it's just what, you know, it's the way it's going. But more and more, you know, you got lawyers in the state that look at this too, and they say, hey, we'd be better off letting somebody else burn this than us doing it. And I think we're going to have a difficult time, I think, to keep building people that are willing to take on the responsibility of burning properties, especially the more difficult one. I think if we stay where we're burning our own lands, we're familiar with them, they're close by, and we're burning them regular, we don't have as much liability. But there's still that smoke issue sometimes with, you know, the residual smoke, or, you know, holds in there at night and somebody has a car wreck or something like that. But anyway, go ahead. 5 minutes, okay. I just had a few lessons learned here. This was the weather. It was just, you know, nothing, 20% chance of rain or clouds. We did actually, that evening we had a shower on the fire. The next morning we had one, but it wasn't significant enough to, in the forecast through the week was pretty light winds until that Sunday afternoon was where it came in. The KBDIs were about 120, although there were reports that we were moderate to heavy. I talked to Brian Williams about it. We looked it up, and it was around 120 KBDI, except if you went over to St. George Island on the south side, there was about 3 acres that were about 600, you know. So I don't know why that was, but that's just what it showed on there. So anyway, I just thought I would just show you a few things. Some of them I've already mentioned, but I'd say it's difficult to burn places that are, you know, a good distance from your home, because you can't, it's hard to look at them real quickly if you need to go there and take a look at them. You need to develop partnerships with people, like people that are working around that area. Fuel buildups along the coast are more difficult places to burn. Take extra prep work, and tie, if you burn around it, it can cause some long-range spotting. I'd say the ability to be resilient when things go poorly, you just got to stick to your, you know, your game plan and look at things and think what's going to happen 3 or 4 years from now, or things are going to be okay. Just think positively sometimes through those. If you prescribe burn causes damage, contact your insurance agent and let them know what happened. If you need a lawyer's assistance, find out who's going to be your, who's going to be representing you. Get advice on how to respond to the media. The difficulty with getting reasonably priced liability insurance after a large insurance payout. I just mentioned to you, you know, what's there. And then again, 4 years is the statute of limitations on getting sued in Florida. So, I don't know, anybody got any questions? It's, go ahead.
Did you hear that, Doug? He wants to know if you were found grossly negligent for the burn.
Here's what the judge, I actually go to the same church the judge goes to. I didn't talk to him after that. I didn't really know him that well. I know him better now. But, you know, here's, out of this, that fire I showed you that got out on the, with Florida Forest Service, where they were sued there above this burn, out of that came the Florida Forest Service through the legislature, raised that that level of negligence to gross negligence after that, you're responding to that chiller fire. So I don't know, the judge said we were not gross negligent. That's what he said. And that's why they said, okay, we're going to try to go to a global settlement because if you had 50 or 60 people suing you, if you can get them to, if the insurance company will agree, everybody's saying, okay, we won't come after you after this. We'll take our piece of this. And that's what they did. So, you know, go ahead.
There was never a trial.
There was mediation. There was no trial. And we had seen, you know, based on what happened with Florida Forest Service in Apalachicola, you know, we had some pretty long discussions with people about how are you going to respond to this, you know. In each situation, now I didn't see anything that we really had that significantly stood out. You know, I can say Doug Scott, who would pull the permit, he had about 850 certified burns at that point. I had about 450. And David Hargerford was on the fire that day. He probably had 250. So we were about 1,500 prescribed burns amongst 3 people on that fire. So it was a pretty experienced fire group. But that doesn't mean, you know, something might happen. So.
So he wants to know, did the policy go up because you have to carry more than that $1 million now, or did it go up because of their payout?
Yeah, I guess, you know, what I understood from the insurance agents, when we had a couple of claims before that the policy, you know, they weren't big ones, and I had one over in Escambia County. I paid $10,000 out of pocket rather than put it up against a policy. But we didn't have anything that stood out. But now, you know, since that time, y'all know what's been going on in California and these other places, all these houses burning down. It's in the news all the time. Insurance companies are paying big money out, and they're actually hiring folks like us with Type 6 engines to go defend their properties on these big, you know, $5 million houses, put sprinkler systems on top of their houses to protect them from burning. And the market keeps changing. You know, we had Michael Orlando in here. He was working on our trucks in California when that front came down. I don't know, it's been 3 or 4 years ago. He was on a fire that was 45,000 acres. They asked him to go in and with a dozer crew to open a line up, and they took a couple of structural trucks in there. And he said, they told him, they said, y'all can accept this assignment or not. So they went in, and about 3 hours later, this front came down. They said, the fire's jumped and you're gonna have to ride it out. So there was a gravel pit about 20 acres in there. The fire burned 200,000 acres that day, if you can believe that. But it jumped into a national forest and burned across, and the wind shifted. And this was like, they were having, you know, 30 days of 100-degree weather, RH is 10, and then you get these 50-mile-an-hour winds coming there, and it blew down to Orville Dam, and you just can't hardly imagine that kind of acreage burning in a day. But, you know, they wrote it out and made it okay. He's got a few pictures and some stories to tell on that, but that kind of situation that we're in nationwide is a scary thing. You know, people don't want to get out and work on these kind of things, especially when they get so dry like that. So I don't know, you know, I don't know. Anyway, so any other questions maybe?
You want me to summarize that? Yeah. Because of some of this, some of the agencies decided not to continue burning with contracts. Some just cut back on what they could do, and some postponed those, because I've already talked to Tyler about all this, so I know those. Tyler's point would be that we have to, if you're working for an agency, you have to think about that political side of it that you might not have as a contractor, but we've got to find to be resilient whether we're in agencies or not on how do we keep going forward.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw some looking on the government on Beta Sam, where government puts out their contract work, and there was a contract coming out of they wanted for possible vendors that could burn on national forests in the Great Basin, say Idaho, Utah, to let them know who they were and if they could do parts of these burns, or if the vendor was big enough that if they could take over the whole national forest, that national forest contract, they would burn, they'd just take it over. Now this is where we're getting to, because if you get out there and look at the people, our numbers are shrinking. I think that, you know, I remember when I worked for Fish and Wildlife Service, you know, we had in our contracts, or in our contracts, there was always this thing at the bottom that said, and all other duties is assigned, and that meant cut the grass or run a dozer or that kind of thing. And the government, you know, is going away from, you know, that kind of work and get more limited. So the cost of burning is going up, I see it, and the cost of, and the money's not there, and the risk keeps going up. And so how are you gonna, and trying to find people that want to work, you know, it's a more difficult thing. COVID has kind of knocked us in the foot a little bit, and, you know, trying to keep the wages up there so that people are willing to do the kind of work that we do. So, yeah.
So
Well,
I want to repeat the question. So the question is, you were contracted by FWC to do this burn. At what point after the burn is that responsibility either shared or transferred
I think
from the
it's still, I
contractor
think
to
it's
the
still,
agency?
if there are litigation issues, I think it's till somebody can prove that it wasn't, or you can prove that it had changed, you know, that wasn't, that fire didn't come. But it's just like that Schuler fire at 44 days, it got out and they got sued over that, you know. If it had been, and you know, y'all probably saw, we worked fires in northern New Mexico last year that was prescribed burn they had done in the fall, snowed on the burn areas, lasted through the winter, spring warmed up, a couple of fires popped out, and they had 2 fires, about 65,000 acres, you know, burned structures, towns in northern New Mexico. And, you know, they were sued over it, and they're still out there trying to work through that. So, I mean, that's what's happening, you know, so. Okay.
I got one online question. I'm kind of summarizing it, paraphrasing it. Are you comfortable with the liability protection being offered by the state of Florida for prescribed burners under the certified prescribed burner? So being a certified prescribed burner, the liability protection that's offered to you.
Well, you know, when we burn with, I mean, you know, people say, I remember we had some discussions from, we were talking about the burn associations that, I remember we had a comment that, you know, that if we're not gross negligent, we're not going to be sued. Well, you know, and this is what our insurance agent said. He said the Florida created this statute saying gross negligence is the standard that we'll hold it, you know, a burner to, but there's no money behind it. So if they can still sue you, you know, if they had property damage, they can still sue you, and you got to use your own money or your own lawyer. And so that's really where it's at. And a lot of times we're not familiar with that, but when you go through something like what I went through, you learn, you know, kind of where, you know, what's that $1 million going to do for you if they put it out, and that you better try to stay under that standard of gross negligence and keep your insurance or have some coverage, you know.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you for all the presentation. It was really good and really informative.
Yeah,
So appreciate taking the time. Thank you.